Okay, let's unpack this deep dive into a world that exists way, way up high, literally. We're talking about the vast high-altitude rangelands of the Tibetan Plateau,
Hmm.
stretching across western China and into parts of the Himalayas like Bhutan.
Right.
And this isn't just any grazing land. It's defined by truly unique ecological conditions that shape life here in ways you just won't see anywhere else on the planet.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, imagine living and thriving at elevations consistently above 3,500 meters. That's over 11,000 feet. The air is thin. The challenges are immense.
And what's fascinating here is precisely how those challenges, these extreme high altitude conditions, haven't just limited life, but have actually forged an entirely distinct way of living, one that's endured for thousands of years. When we look at pastoral regions globally, often it's water scarcity, right?
Yeah.
That defines where farming ends and grazing begins.
Yeah, usually the dry areas.
But our sources really highlight that on the Tibetan Plateau, it's primarily the elevation that sets that boundary. Above 3,500 meters, the climate is just. It's too harsh.
Too harsh.
The growing season is way too short and cold for conventional grain cultivation.
Exactly. I mean, think about it. You know how hard it is to grow crops at high mountain altitudes, even in like the Alps or the Rockies?
Yeah.
Now, picture that writ large, across an area bigger than many countries. It's not viable for farming.
That at all.
But here's where the Tibetan Plateau differs from many other dry rangelands. In significant portions, particularly in the east, the sources indicate they actually get adequate rainfall during that short summer growing season.
Right, that's a key point. It isn't necessarily a desert landscape in terms of moisture everywhere.
Yeah.
It's really an alpine landscape defined by cold and altitude.
So while some areas might face drought cycles, the main thing isn't always a chronic lack of water, is it?
No, not across the board. It's more the extreme temperatures and that very, very brief window when plants can actually grow. And this unique constraint, it had a profound historical impact. It basically meant these high-range lands weren't desirable or even usable for settled agriculturalists back in the day.
Right. Farmers couldn't compete for this land because they couldn't make a living growing crops there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So nomadic pastoralism wasn't just one activity among others. It became, and it remained, the dominant human activity.
The main way of life.
The sole way of life, really, on these lands for millennia.
And that history, that deep connection to a land that only supports grazing, brings us directly to the subject of this deep dive. The people, the nomadic pastoralists themselves. These are communities who didn't just survive in this incredible, demanding environment. They developed really sophisticated practices and a rich culture intrinsically linked to their animals and the specific rhythms of the land.
Absolutely.
So today, we're going to try and extract the key knowledge from your sources to understand their way of life, the significant challenges they face in the modern world.
Which are considerable.
Oh, yeah. And also discover the surprising importance and potential of a resource they manage, yak wool.
Yeah, that's a fascinating thread we'll pull on. We've drawn insights from quite a compelling stack of material academic journals, detailed reports, some really descriptive articles, and personal essays, too.
A good mix, then.
Yeah, they offer a look into the traditions that have defined these communities for centuries, the adaptations they're making now, the profound struggles they're navigating, and also some of the innovative paths being explored for the future.
So our mission for you listening is to cut through this wealth of information, pull out those critical nuggets of knowledge, understand what makes this unique way of life tick, shine a light on the pressures it's under, and really explore that often overlooked importance and potential of yak hair and wool. Think of this as your focused shortcut to being well-informed about a fascinating, complex, and rapidly changing world.
It's a world where, really, the very foundation of existence is just inextricably linked to this unique, high-altitude environment and the animals that make it habitable.
So let's really start there with that environmental foundation. We've mentioned the elevation, above 3,500 meters. Let's just underscore how much that single factor dictates everything.
It really does. It acts as the ultimate ecological filter. This isn't just high, it's high elevation coupled with specific temperature and precipitation patterns.
Okay.
It dictates which plant species can survive, the density and nutritional value of the forage, and crucially, that incredibly short productive season.
Right.
While lower altitudes on the plateau might support some rain-fed agriculture, above that threshold, it just becomes impossible for farming.
And this environmental reality, it wasn't something that could be easily overcome with early agricultural tech, was it?
No, not at all. It created this natural, persistent boundary. It separated the farmers down in the valleys and lower plains from the herders up in the high country.
And this clear geographical and ecological separation meant that for vast stretches of time, nomadic pastoralism didn't have to constantly defend its territory, did it?
Exactly. Unlike in many other parts of the world, where pastoralists got pushed into increasingly marginal lands by expanding farms.
Right.
Here, the high country was the domain of the herder. It allowed these systems to develop over millennia with less direct conflict over land use with farmers.
Which must have allowed for this deep, deep knowledge to develop.
Precisely. Sophisticated, deep-rooted knowledge about rangeland ecology, animal management, seasonal migration cycles, all totally tailored to this specific environment.
And that long, relatively uninterrupted history on the land, shaped purely by the needs of grazing animals and human survival at altitude. That's the backdrop.
That's the deep historical backdrop, yeah.
Yeah.
It informed the development of not just resource management practices, but also the cultural identity, the social structures, the belief systems of the communities who live there.
Which leads us nicely to the people themselves, the human element of this story. Your sources point out something pretty remarkable. A high degree of shared cultural identity across this immense scale.
Yes, it's quite striking. Despite spanning a huge geographical area, we're talking over 2.5 million square kilometers, much of it pastoral. The vast majority of the nomadic population identifies as Tibetan.
Wow, that's huge.
It is. And they share a common language, one that's spoken, with various dialects, but across almost 3,000 kilometers. And it boasts a shared written history going back around 1,300 years.
Incredible continuity.
And their core religious beliefs, primarily Tibetan Buddhism, and many fundamental cultural practices are also broadly consistent across the entire pastoral area.
Okay.
Now, there are smaller nomadic groups, like some Kazakh and Mongol communities and parts of Qinghai province mentioned in the sources.
Right.
But the dominant cultural thread is undeniably Tibetan.
And this shared language, culture, religious framework, that must have been crucial over centuries, right, for communication, trade, movement.
Absolutely, enabling networks of kinship and shared understanding across the plateau.
Yeah.
But your sources also really strongly emphasize a critical aspect of these societies that maybe often doesn't get the attention it deserves.
Which?
The absolutely vital role played by women.
Ah, yes, foundational.
Absolutely central. Women on the Tibetan Plateau, within these nomadic societies, they're not just participants, they are pillars. Beyond their fundamental role as bearers and rearers of children, ensuring the continuation of the community, its future human resources.
Right.
They hold immense responsibilities in managing the household, the tent, the daily life revolving around the animals.
Just making key decisions.
Critical decisions. The sources highlight that women make critical decisions about using precious rangeland resources, where to find and use forage and water on a daily basis, how to manage the scarce fuel sources like yak dung.
And it's not just managing, it's doing the work too, right?
Oh, definitely. They're deeply involved in the physical labor. The sources emphasize women are hands-on herders responsible for many daily livestock activities.
Like what?
Milking, caring for young animals, and they also undertake the laborious tasks of harvesting and processing livestock products, turning milk into butter and cheese, processing wool and hair.
So much work.
Their knowledge, their skills, their daily work directly impacts the health and productivity of the herd and the sustainability of the rangeland itself. Their role is anything but passive.
No, sounds completely foundational.
It is. It really underscores that traditional ecological knowledge and management practices are distributed throughout the community, with women holding significant expertise, particularly in those intricate details of resource management, animal care, product transformation.
But you mentioned change earlier.
Yes. It's crucial to understand that while this deep history and cultural bedrock exist, these communities, all of them, regardless of their specific location or cultural subgroup, are currently experiencing rapid and profound change.
Driven by?
Largely by the forces of economic development, modernization, changing government policies. These are reaching even these remote, high-altitude areas.
Bringing opportunities, but also big challenges, I imagine.
Exactly. Significant challenges to their traditional way of life.
And those forces of change are undeniably impacting the traditional pastoral practices, leading to adaptations in the rhythms of daily life and herd management.
Yeah, things are shifting. While the core principle remains raising livestock on the rangeland through seasonal movement, The specific ways this is done are evolving.
How so?
Well, production practices are broadly similar across the plateau, but the composition of livestock, the mix of species and the size of herds, can vary significantly from one region to the next.
And that variation reflects?
Often the specific type of rangeland, like as a drier alpine steppe or wetter alpine meadow. And also the historical focus of that particular community.
Makes sense. So what are the key animals? We know yaks are central.
Yaks are the foundation, absolutely. Then you have yak cattle hybrids, known by names like Juzo or Dsomos,
Okay.
sheep, goats, and horses. In many areas, animal husbandry isn't just important, it's the only viable form of agriculture possible at that altitude.
Right.
But these communities aren't totally isolated islands. The sources point out strong economic links to agricultural communities and markets outside the high pastoral areas.
Trading animal products for grain and other things they can't produce.
Precisely. Trading livestock products for grain, tea, tools, other necessities.
And you mentioned adaptations. One of the big ones seems to be this move towards settling.
Yes, that's a really notable recent trend highlighted in the sources. A shift towards semi-settlement. While we've described them as nomadic, in recent decades, the majority of pastoralists across the Tibetan Plateau have actually built permanent or semi-permanent houses and shelters.
Okay, so they have a house now. Where are these usually built?
Typically located in their traditional winter-spring pastures, often areas that offer slightly more shelter or maybe better accessibility.
And they spend a good chunk of the year there.
Yeah, potentially 6 or 7 months during the harshest part of the year.
So yes, the majority are now settled in the sense of having a fixed dwelling for part of the year. But, and this seems crucial from the sources, this doesn't mean they've abandoned pastoralism or mobility, does it?
No, not at all. The core practice remains grazing livestock nomadically. The people have a fixed home base for part of the year, but the herds still move seasonally,
Following the grass.
following forage availability across the landscape. Mobility is still absolutely central, a defining characteristic of the system.
So the whole strategy revolves around moving the livestock.
To different pastures at different times of the year. And it's not random movement, it's a sophisticated tracking of favorable forage conditions.
Influenced by what? Rainfall? Past use?
All of that. How recently a pasture was grazed, the amount of snowfall and rainfall it received, the growth stage of the grass, even the physical condition of the animals themselves. A fatter animal can handle tougher conditions or travel further, you see.
I see. And these animals, they live pretty much entirely off the grazing, right?
Almost entirely on year-round grazing. They are foragers, relying on what they can find on the rangeland in any given season.
What about hay? Do they make hay?
They do cut hay, but generally in minimal quantities. It's primarily reserved for weak animals or for the horses during the really difficult winter and early spring months when there's absolutely no green forage.
Okay. But even this mobile system is changing slightly. You mentioned fencing.
Yes, practices are evolving even within this mobile framework. The sources mention an increasing trend towards fencing rangeland,
Why fence?
specifically to reserve pastures, making sure those crucial winter and early spring grazing areas aren't depleted too early in the season.
Oh, protecting the critical resources.
Exactly. And there's also growing interest in planting tame pastures with specific grass varieties, either for supplemental grazing closer to the settlement area, or maybe for cutting more substantial amounts of hay.
So definite shifts from the purely open access system of the past.
Significant shifts, yes.
Yeah.
Adaptations to new pressures and possibilities.
And woven into the fabric of this entire system, the animal that truly makes life possible in this incredibly harsh environment is the yak.
The yak.
Yeah.
It is without question the defining animal of Tibetan and high-altitude Himalayan pastoralism.
Just uniquely adapted.
Uniquely adapted, possessing physical characteristics, thick coat, large lungs, efficient metabolism that allow it to thrive where other livestock species would just perish.
Ah.
It is not hyperbole to say that the presence of the yak is what enables human life to exist sustainably at these extreme altitudes.
And its importance comes from just how versatile it is.
Incredible versatility. The yak is a multi-purpose resource, providing this comprehensive suite of products essential for survival and livelihood.
Let's tick them off. Milk.
Milk, yes, which is transformed through really labor-intensive processes into vital, long-lasting products like butter and cheese. Staples of the nomad diet, crucial for trade.
Meat.
Meat, a primary source of protein, harvested mainly from male animals.
Fiber.
The coarse hair and the fine wool kulu for textiles, ropes, hides for leather.
And they work too.
Indispensable work animals, used for draft, pulling heavy loads, and for riding across that difficult terrain.
And fuel.
Perhaps most crucially, in a treeless environment, yak dung, Dried on the plains, it's the primary and often only source of fuel for heating tents and homes and for cooking.
Wow. It's an animal where literally nothing goes to waste.
Nothing. Every single part contributes directly to sustaining the community's life. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the yak isn't just food or fiber.
No.
It is the cornerstone of their entire ecological, economic, and cultural system.
And that's even reflected in the language, isn't it?
Deeply ingrained. The Tibetan term for yaks, nor, also translates directly to wealth.
Nor means wealth. That says it all.
It speaks volumes, doesn't it? Your wealth isn't just money, it is your yaks. And beyond these practical and economic roles, yaks hold a significant place in pastoral rituals, religious festivals, local folklore.
Cementing their central, almost sacred position.
Exactly.
Okay, let's zoom in a bit on yak management. Your sources give some specifics on their reproduction. They mature quite late.
Relatively late, yes. Female yaks typically reach sexual maturity and have their first calf, usually at around 4 years old.
And then one calf every other year.
That's the general pattern. One calf every other year. However, in areas with particularly good forage conditions, maybe due to good rainfall or careful management, they might calve annually.
And the timing of calving is deliberate.
Oh, strategically crucial. Births are timed for May or June.
Why then?
It ensures that the most vulnerable period for the newborns coincides with the start of the warmer season and the availability of new grass. It allows calves to grow stronger before the harshness of winter sets in.
Makes perfect sense. And the males?
Male yaks are essential for breeding, obviously, and for carrying loads when they're older. But they're often kept until they're about 4 years old, at which point they are typically harvested for meat. It's about balancing herd structure and resource use.
It's a system born of long, hard experience, finely tuned to those environmental constraints.
Absolutely.
But while the yak is foundational, it's not just about yaks in isolation, is it? Diversity in the herd seems key.
Yes, absolutely. While yaks are iconic and essential, sheep and goats play an incredibly important role, especially in the drier western regions of the Tibetan Plateau and also in places like Bhutan.
What do they provide?
Wool and cashmere. Tibetan cashmere is noted for its high quality. Meat, which is often the preferred meat for family consumption and for sale in towns. And in many regions, they milk sheep and goats too, which is also processed. And like yaks, they provide hides and can serve as pack animals, especially goats in some areas.
And they reproduce faster than yaks.
That's a key advantage. Sheep and goats normally give birth every year. This allows herds to increase numbers relatively quickly, which can be important economically.
But there's a downside to that, higher risk.
Higher risk, definitely, especially in this harsh environment. They face significant mortality during severe winters, especially the lambs and kids born earlier in the year, say February or March. They're just less developed when the worst weather hits.
Yeah.
Your sources cite that devastating winter of 1996-97 as a stark example. Losses were immense in some areas. 25% of adult goats, a shocking 70% of kids, and 30% of lambs lost.
Wow, devastating. What about horses?
Horses are also part of the mix in certain areas, though usually in smaller numbers than yaks, sheep, or goats. In some northeastern regions, maybe up to 10% of the total livestock units.
Mostly for riding.
Primarily for riding across the fast distances, and also as pack animals. It's a cultural point of distinction that Tibetan nomads generally do not milk horses or eat horse meat, unlike some other Central Asian nomadic cultures.
Okay. And the specific mix of these animals varies a lot by region.
Dramatically.
Yeah.
It really depends on the local ecology, the type of rangeland, rainfall, etc. Your sources give some really compelling examples.
Like?
Okay, Shuanghu County in the Tar, that's the Tibetan Autonomous Region in China. It's a drier alpine steppe, better for sheep and goats. Their yaks make up only about 4% of the total herd composition.
Only 4% yaks.
Compare that to Jiali County, about 400 kilometers east. Much wetter alpine meadow area, way better for yaks. There, they constitute 53% of the herds.
Big difference.
Huge difference. And then you go to Hongguan County in Sichuan province, and over 85% of the livestock can be yaks.
So this isn't random. It's tailored to the land.
It reflects millennia of accumulated local knowledge about optimizing the herd for the specific conditions of that patch of land. And raising a mix of species, this multi-species grazing system provides significant benefits.
Ecologically.
Ecologically, yes.
Yeah.
Different animal species have different dietary preferences. They graze different plants or parts of plants. Herding them together allows for more complete and efficient use of the available vegetation compared to just having one species.
Here's where it gets really interesting. It's like they've basically designed an ecosystem to be as efficient as possible.
In a way, yes. It's a system fine-tuned over centuries to maximize the productivity of that natural grassland. And beyond ecological efficiency, having different animals provides a diversified range of products and uses.
Right. Milk, meat, wool, cashmere, hides, transport.
Exactly. For both consumption within the family and for sale or barter.
And it spreads the risk, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a brilliant strategy for both resourcefulness and risk minimization. Maintaining diverse herds is a natural buffer against total loss.
Like if a disease hits one species.
Right. If a specific disease affects goats, your yaks and sheep might be okay. If a certain type of harsh winter is particularly hard on lambs, your yak herd might fare better. It spreads the risk across the livestock portfolio.
Sorry. Your sources use a specific example from Shigatse Prefecture.
Yes, the Fala area in northwestern Montgomery County, within Shigatse Prefecture of the Tar. It illustrates this complex mixed composition. 45% sheep, 40% goats, 40% yaks, and 1% horses.
That's a real mix. Must be complex to manage.
Very complex. The sources emphasize that managing a herd with this diversity requires sophisticated strategies because each species has its own unique needs, behaviors, production characteristics that have to be factored into migration routes, grazing plans, everything.
And even the structure of the herds tells a story. The mix of males, females, young animals.
It provides even deeper insight into the nomads' expertise and their economic realities. Using that Shigatse Prefecture example again, the sources note a seemingly high proportion of adult male sheep and goats, around 30%.
Which might look inefficient if you're just focused on breeding.
Exactly. From a purely breeding for meat perspective, an outsider might think, why so many males? But this raises an important question.
Which is, what's the real reason?
Well, while an outsider might see those non-breeding males as unproductive, for these nomads, they're absolutely essential for economic survival and sustenance.
How so?
A significant chunk of their yearly cash income comes from the wool harvested from these adult male sheep and the valuable cashmere combed from the adult male goats.
The fiber.
The fiber. And furthermore, these animals are a primary source of meat for their own consumption. Families might butcher 20, 30 sheep and goats each year for their own food security.
So those males are vital income generators and food sources.
Absolutely vital. Not unproductive at all in their system.
It completely reframes what productivity means in that context. It's not just maximizing births.
No, it's about optimizing the entire range of outputs needed for survival and livelihood in their specific economy and environment.
And mobility requires pack animals, too.
Essential in the traditional system, yaks, and sometimes sheep or goats in certain areas, were indispensable for transporting tents, supplies, food, trading goods between seasonal pastures. A nomad family traditionally needed a good number of pack yaks just to survive and move.
So the intricate composition and structure of the herds, it's not just numbers.
No, it reflects deep ecological knowledge, sophisticated risk management, and an ingenious system for meeting the diverse needs of the household from limited resources in an incredibly demanding environment.
But as we touched upon earlier, this traditional, highly adapted way of life is now facing rapid, intense, and complex pressures from modernization and broader economic development.
Indeed. The sources make it clear that even with that trend towards building houses and being semi-settled, most nomads continue to rely heavily on nomadic grazing for their core livelihood.
So the settling is an adaptation, but the grazing continues.
Exactly. But it exists within this rapidly changing economic and social landscape. The traditional pastoral system is becoming increasingly difficult to sustain as the sole or even primary source of income. This is leading to increased economic difficulty for many.
So what does this all mean on the ground? It means a way of life that has worked, has been sustainable for millennia, is now under pressures it's never faced before.
Intense pressures. This increased economic difficulty is tied to complex factors, fluctuating market prices for wool, cashmere, meat, butter,
Right.
changes in trade networks, the rising costs of goods and services that nomads now need to buy. It's harder to make ends meet just from the herd.
And this economic pressure is linked to environmental challenges too, like overgrazing.
It's intertwined. The sources link increasing herd sizes, which might be a strategy by some nomads to try and maintain income levels as individual prices fluctuate to worsening rural desertification and environmental degradation on the rangelands.
More animals mean more pressure on the grass.
More animals on the same land can lead to overgrazing, which degrades the vegetation and the soil. This raises an important question. While increasing herd size might seem like a way to combat poverty, the sources show it's actually contributing to environmental degradation, creating a difficult cycle.
A vicious cycle. Economic pressure leads to larger herds, which damages the environment, which makes pastoralism even harder.
Which potentially increases poverty and maybe the perceived need for even more animals. It's tough to break.
And the consequences go beyond the environment and economy, social impacts.
Definitely. These pressures contribute to rural exodus. Individuals, especially younger generations, leave the challenging pastoral life for what they see as better economic opportunities or just easier living conditions in towns and cities.
And when people leave,
That outward migration, in turn, leads to cultural impoverishment. Traditional knowledge, skills, social structures that rely on community presence and passing things down through generations. They risk being lost.
so it's a complex web of challenges. Are these felt everywhere?
They are experienced across the region, maybe in varying degrees. The sources detailing the situation in Bhutan highlight some specific struggles for yak herders there.
So such as?
They report declining forage availability on the rangelands, increased predation by wild animals, snow leopards, wolves, which is a significant threat to herd numbers,
Ooh.
a notable lack of interest from younger generations who often prefer town life, other jobs, prevalent issues with disease and parasites affecting herd health and productivity, and often poor access to essential veterinary services in those remote grazing areas.
And climate change is hitting them too.
Tangible impacts in Bhutan, according to the sources. Warming temperatures at high altitudes cause heat stress for the yaks, which are cold-adapted animals.
Right.
It's also messing with the environmental cues that traditionally govern migration timing, making it harder for herders to know when and where to move.
That's fundamental knowledge being disrupted.
It is. Plus, there's the encroachment of plant species from warmer climates, like certain types of rhododendron, into traditional alpine grazing areas. This changes the composition and quality of the forage, potentially deteriorating the rangelands further.
And government support in Bhutan. Historically,
The sources note that historically, the yak farming industry in Bhutan received relatively minimal government policy attention or support, maybe overshadowed by other agricultural sectors.
but that's changing.
It is changing now, as concerns grow about the decline of the industry and the potential loss of this unique way of life.
And a really practical problem they face is just people power, labor.
A very significant challenge highlighted by 81% of herders surveyed in the Bhutanese sources. Labor shortage. There simply aren't enough people willing or available to do the demanding work of herding,
Which affects everything, but especially.
especially labor-intensive tasks like yak hair and wool production. Fewer herders are engaging in the traditional processing of fiber because of this lack of labor. And that's compounded by the lack of accessible processing facilities.
It paints a compelling and really concerning picture of a system under immense strain. Environment, economy, social change, climate change, all linked.
Pushing these communities to a precarious point. However, within this context of profound challenges, there exists this resource that holds significant, yet currently largely underexplored, potential.
Back to the yak wool.
Gulu? Yakul. Gulu. This fiber isn't new to them, obviously. It has a very long history of importance, though traditionally used in ways perhaps less familiar to global textile markets.
It's like the tents.
Exactly. Historically, the coarse outer yak hair and the softer underdown, the kulu, were essential for making utilitarian items fundamental for survival. Woven into those incredibly strong, heavy black tents you see on the Tibetan Plateau, providing vital shelter from wind and cold.
And ropes, bags.
Ropes, bags, and blankets, particularly noted in sources from Bhutan. It's been a foundational part of their material culture for centuries.
But the real hidden gem is the soft stuff.
The real gem is kulu, or sometimes just ku. This is the fine, incredibly soft, downy fiber that grows underneath the yak's much coarser outer guard hair.
And it's highly valued.
The sources describe it as precious, referring to it almost reverently as the wealth of the gods.
Wealth of the gods. And its properties are special.
Truly remarkable properties, making it stand out even among other high-quality natural fibers. It's exceptionally soft, breathable, and durable.
Doesn't shed.
Non-molting, unlike some fibers. But its most incredible quality, honed by a millennia of evolution in extreme cold, is its insulation.
Super warm.
The fiber structure blocks wind, sheds snow, traps body heat incredibly efficiently, leading the sources to describe it as potentially the warmest clothing material on the planet.
Wow, strong too.
Naturally strong due to its high amino acid content,
Right.
naturally hypoallergenic, possesses antibacterial properties. Just an amazing natural fiber.
Okay, how does it stack up against cashmere, which most people know as a luxury fiber?
Good question. The sources offer a detailed comparison. Warmth. Just as warm as cashmere, potentially even warmer because of those unique insulation properties.
Okay. Sustainability.
Often considered more sustainable than mass-market cashmere production. Yaks are delicate eaters. They tend to nip the tops of grasses rather than uprooting them like goats can.
Less damaging to the land.
Less likely to cause widespread land degradation if managed properly. Plus, yak fiber production is typically small-scale, often involved hand collection, less reliant on fossil fuels. Contrast that with some large-scale cashmere operations linked to severe overgrazing and desertification.
So, potentially warmer and often more sustainable. How about durability? Does it last?
It's noted as being longer lasting than cashmere, less prone to pilling those annoying little cyberballs.
Ah, yes. Hates pilling.
It also withstands inconsistent care, like careful hand washing better than cashmere, retains its structure and appearance well.
And softness. Is it as soft as cashmere?
The micron count of high-quality kulu is comparable, typically around 16 microns, while cashmere ranges maybe 14.5 to 17 microns.
So very.
Very fine. Remember, lower micron numbers mean finer, softer fibers. It's significantly finer than most sheep's wool, though some superfine merino can be similar or finer. Its breathability, even with the warmth, makes it excellent for layering.
Okay, this sounds like a miracle fiber. Who knew this fiber, often just used for tents or ropes, is actually warmer and more sustainable than cashmere? But are there downsides? Challenges in working with it?
Yes, the primary challenges are really in the processing. Yakulu fibers are relatively short compared to cashmere fibers.
Which means?
They're more prone to breaking during mechanical spinning processes, and it requires a significant amount of dehairing.
Getting the coarse hairs out.
Exactly,
Okay.
separating that incredibly soft underdown from the much coarser guard hairs. This is often done using specialized machinery, needs multiple passes, and it results in considerable fiber loss.
How much loss?
Only about 30% of the initial collected fiber might be the high-quality soft kulu suitable for fine textiles. The rest is coarse guard hair.
Wow, only 30% yield of the really soft stuff. That underlines how valuable that 30% is.
It is labor-intensive, and the yield is low. But what's fascinating here is, while the yield of the softest fiber is low after dehairing, the coarser fibers aren't wasted. They can be used for other products like carpets or filling, demonstrating that resourcefulness.
Ah, still using everything. What about color?
Color is another factor. Kulu primarily comes in natural, dark colors, dark brown, beige, some white or gray. The white, gray, and beige are the rarest and most prized.
Hard to dye.
Naturally difficult to dye artificially and achieve bright, consistent colors without damaging the fiber, so that limits the color options compared to sheep's wool or even cashmere.
And the harvesting itself sounds tough. 99.7% of Bhutanese herders found it difficult.
It is demanding work. The Kulu collection happens annually during the spring shedding season around June or July in Bhutan.
And it's plucked by hand, not combed like cashmere goats.
Traditionally collected by hand, yeah. Unlike goats that are often just combed, it often involves tying the yak's legs, carefully laying the animal on its side, and then gently plucking the loose fiber by hand from the shedding areas.
That takes skill and trust.
It requires strength, patience, and a good relationship with the animal, definitely.
Okay, this harvesting sounds like a real labor of love, followed by a seriously labor-intensive processing journey.
It is indeed a multi-stage process requiring significant effort. After hand collection, meticulous sorting by quality and color. Then hand washing, ideally with biodegradable soap.
Then the dehairing.
Dehairing, often by machine, with that significant fiber loss we mentioned. Spinning, especially hand spinning, is challenging due to the short fiber length.
Then weaving, finishing.
Weaving, finishing processes, often a final hand wash. The sources explicitly state that transforming raw fiber into a finished product, like one yak wool scarf, can take days of work.
Days for one scarf, yet historically the market value wasn't great.
Historically quite low compared to other yak products like butter or cheese, primarily used for self-consumption or local barter. The Bhutan sources note the annual income herders currently get from fiber is low. The potential is underexplored.
But potential is there.
But, and this is the crucial point, they also clearly state there's a huge scope of generating income from yak hair and wool if that potential is properly tapped.
And the herders are willing.
The willingness is definitely there among the herders themselves. In Bhutan, a remarkable 92.5% of herders surveyed said they'd be willing to continue harvesting fiber and potentially making products if
If what?
if the government or external partners supported them with access to markets and provided necessary processing facilities.
That's a huge percentage willing, given the right support.
It is. Only 7.5% were unsure, mainly citing that persistent issue of labor shortage as their main barrier.
So the bottlenecks are infrastructure, markets, labor, not lack of fiber or willingness.
It seems to be the case. And it's fascinating. That Bhutanese source noted a statistically significant gender difference in willingness, p 0.05. More females were willing to continue yak fiber production than men.
Interesting. Why might that be?
It likely links back to that fundamental role women traditionally play in harvesting and processing animal products. It suggests supporting yak fiber production could be a really targeted pathway for empowering women in these communities.
Building on existing skills and roles.
Exactly. The sources attribute the declining interest in traditional fiber processing among some herders in Bhutan to how cumbersome and labor-intensive it is without modern tools and facilities.
They need better equipment.
Lack of good shearing equipment, proper processing units for washing and dehairing, general access to necessary machinery. These are highlighted as key challenges in modernizing production.
So if the traditional system faces huge challenges and this incredible high-potential fiber is largely underutilized because of those same challenges, labor, processing, markets, what about innovative approaches? How do you unlock this?
Right. And here's where your source material introduces the Norlha project.
Norlha, what is it?
Norlha is presented as a direct, targeted initiative aimed at addressing those interconnected crises, the economic difficulty, the rural exodus, and the environmental threat from overgrazing.
Okay. Founded when? By whom?
Founded in 2005 by individuals with experience in both sustainable business development and deep knowledge of Tibetan culture, explicitly to tackle these issues head-on.
And their core idea?
Their core vision is to fundamentally improve the value derived from yaks for the communities. The strategy centers on focusing specifically on creating high-value added products using that precious Kulu fiber.
The soft stuff.
The soft stuff, yeah. Targeting the international luxury market.
Luxury market. Why?
The idea is that by generating significant income from a relatively small volume of high-quality fiber, they can create a viable pathway out of poverty for herder families, and simultaneously provide incentives and models to combat rural desertification by promoting sustainable herd management. Less pressure needed if the value per animal is higher.
Makes sense. And they focus on traditional skills.
A central, almost philosophical element is reviving lost or declining traditional skills, specifically hand spinning and hand weaving. This isn't just a production technique. It's seen as a direct response to rural depopulation and poverty.
Creating jobs rooted in culture.
Creating skilled, sustainable, well-paid employment rooted in cultural heritage within the community. Their long-term ambition, stated in the sources, is incredibly broad: to touch and positively impact the entire Tibetan nomad community across the plateau. That's potentially 13 million yaks.
Huge ambition. Where did they start?
They began with a focused pilot project in Zorge Ritoma, a village in Gansu province in China. Ritoma was chosen partly because it offered a context for integration into the broader Chinese economy and society.
High altitude?
Oh yeah, 3,200 meters. Home to about 1,500 people, managing substantial livestock herds, around 10,000 yaks and 25,000 sheep equivalents when they started.
And how did they set it up? As a charity?
Interestingly, no. Their implementation strategy involved operating as a commercial company, ISD partners, rather than a traditional NGO.
Why a company?
The sources note this was to clarify their position, ensure a business-oriented approach, and explicitly avoid any political dimension. Crucially, for community buy-in, they worked closely with the locals to establish a local association, Zanama.
Dama.
Yeah, this association serves as a key stakeholder and partner, provides community acceptance, local leadership, and helps facilitate partnership with the local government.
Did the government help?
Yes, the government even provided support by building a road to the village, which improved access significantly.
So community partnership was key. How did they build the skills?
From the ground up, really. An initial core team from Ritoma was sent for intensive training internationally, Cambodia, Nepal, learning sophisticated weaving, dyeing, quality management.
Then they came back and taught others.
Exactly. They became the trainers, teaching 60 local villagers over 6 months in the newly built workshop. Production of fine accessories and fabrics began relatively quickly.
High quality achieved quickly.
Remarkably high quality in a short time frame, yeah. Partly attributed to the trainees' motivation and their sense of ownership through that Zama association.
And their market strategy. Selling to whom?
Deliberately focused on the high-end, B2B, business-to-business, luxury market. They sell their finished products, scarves, blankets, fabrics, directly to luxury brands, high-fashion designers, exclusive shops.
Why B2B?
The justification is that the quality of the yak hulu, its rarity, the story of artisan handwork, and the project's social and environmental mission. It all aligns perfectly with the values and demands of luxury consumers.
Okay.
They initially focused on France, then expanded across Europe, the US, Asia.
And the results? Is it working?
The results reported in your sources are quite encouraging. Norlha has seen growing turnover, expected to achieve positive net profit. It demonstrates that this luxury market value-added model can be economically viable.
What about the environmental side? Herd sizes.
Positive movement there too within Rotoma village. Herd size has decreased since the project began, moving down from over 12,000 yak equivalents towards a target of 5,000, which they believe is needed for the ecosystem to recover.
So providing alternative income reduces pressure on grazing?
That's the goal. They even have plans for mutual contracts with herder families to accelerate herd reduction in exchange for participation in benefits from Norlha.
And the social impact? Jobs? Income?
Clearly positive within the village. Norlha is creating a growing number of well-paid, stable jobs. Sources mention increasing staff numbers, and the average salary paid by Norlha is significantly higher than the regional average.
How much higher?
Around 110, 130 euros per month, compared to a regional average often cited around 50 euros per month.
Big difference.
Provides sustainable employment, improves living standards, offers a compelling alternative to leaving the village.
And the craftsmanship itself, weaving, tailoring.
The sources highlight different sections. Weaving basically built a textile industry from a relatively clean slate there, reviving skills. Tailoring opened in 2012. Employs mainly women, 11 women, 1 man. Very empowering.
Linking traditional skills with new designs.
Linking traditional hand-sewing skills with contemporary design demands. Requires intense attention to detail, rigorous quality control. They produce everything from felt toys to traditional and contemporary clothing, even monk robes. The hand-sewing adds a unique quality.
And felting. That's traditional, too.
Felting is an ancient craft. Traditionally, women's work on the plateau for utilitarian things like mats, boots, raincoats. Norlha is noted as being the first to really experiment with felting, the soft yak kulu.
How do they do it?
They combine modern machinery for initial processing with intricate hand techniques to get exceptional results, creating soft, luscious felt fabrics of different thicknesses, even very lightweight ones. About 16 women work in felting, bringing traditional ingenuity to this innovation.
So what made Norlha successful? Key factors.
Sources point to a few things. The founder's prior experience in similar projects like Artisans d'Angkor, that crucial community buy-in via the Zama Association and government partnership, and the strategic B2B luxury model, which lets them focus on quality, not mass marketing.
Any mistakes mentioned? Lessons learned?
They offer a candid lesson learned, actually. A mistake was spreading their limited budget and effort into developing other projects too early, like thermal insulation from yak hair or dairy processing.
Diluted resources.
Yeah, it diluted resources and slowed the core development of the Norlha textile enterprise. Focus was key.
So Norlha presents a compelling case study, a potential answer, maybe, showing how focusing on value-added products from a unique traditional resource like Kulu can potentially create sustainable livelihoods and help the environment.
It offers a potential pathway forward, definitely. But this raises an important question.
Which is,
can this specific luxury market value-added model, rooted in a particular context like Rotoma, be successfully scaled and replicated across the vast, diverse Tibetan Plateau? Can it truly impact the broader nomad community?
yeah, scaling is the huge challenge.
Norlha is one successful example, but the scale of the challenge across the entire region, millions of yaks, hundreds of thousands of herders, it's immense.
Still, it shows the potential is there, leveraging unique resources, integrating skills.
Which brings us to maybe a deeper level of understanding that bond between herders and their yaks. Something beautifully illustrated in your sources by communities like the Dakbas.
The Dakbas of Lonak Valley in Sikkim, part of the Himalayas.
Right. The sources highlight an incredibly intimate, profound connection here, built on a lifetime of shared existence.
A relationship based on deep knowledge?
Deep ecological knowledge and an intense effort to understand the animals themselves. The Dakbas make this conscious daily effort to read yak behavior, understand their needs in that complex mountain environment.
How do they do that? What signs do they read?
The sources give wonderful specific examples. Dakbas recognize subtle signs of a yak's mood or physical state. Signs of anger,
Yeah.
red eyes, ears pinned back, horning the ground, a raised tail.
Okay.
They also recognize signs of heat stress, increasingly important with climate change, like a yak sticking its tongue out or actively trying to submerge itself in water to cool down.
It's like an instinctive understanding.
Almost. A result of prolonged, close involvement from childhood. They also have this almost uncanny ability to recognize their own individual yaks, even when herds from different families mix up the high pastures.
Wow.
Just from daily interaction, deep familiarity.
But how do they guide these big animals?
A combination of continuous communication and traditional tools. Herders use a range of auditory displays, whistling, shouting specific calls, even calling out individual yak names.
Uh-huh.
And they also use a traditional slingshot called a word hoe.
A slingshot. To hit them?
No, not necessarily to hit them, more to create a sharp crackling sound in specific directions to encourage movement to guide them.
Ah, using sound.
And there's a saying among the Dakpas, think and act like a yak.
Think like a yak.
It really encapsulates this intimacy, reflects the deep effort they put into understanding the animal's perspective,
Yeah.
and needs to gain its trust and manage it effectively.
And their whole lives revolve around the yaks.
Entire daily rhythm, yeah. Structured around the yak's needs. Milking females in the morning, caring for calves, processing milk into butter and cheese, collecting the herd in the evening from grazing areas.
And there's a traditional division of labor.
Yes, mentioned in the sources. Men typically handle the physically demanding tasks of herding, collecting animals from distant pastures. Women are primarily responsible for milking, all the dairy processing, collecting essential yak dung for fuel, managing household chores.
A system forged over centuries.
This deeply ingrained sequence of tasks has forged a unique tradition and social structure over centuries of this shared existence.
And the yak isn't just an animal to them, is it? There's a spiritual dimension.
Profoundly sacred status among the Dakpas occupies an important place in their religious and social life. As devout Buddhists, animal sacrifice goes directly against their core values.
Seeing animals as sentient beings.
Deserving of compassion and protection from suffering.
Which leads to rituals like sithar, animal liberation.
Yes, a powerful and moving ritual. Sithar means animal liberation. Highly virtuous act in Tibetan Buddhism, practiced across parts of Asia. For the Dakpas, it's also a very personal expression of their bond with their yaks.
How does it work?
Typically involves a female yak, formally offered to a deity, maybe for household well-being. Once liberated through this ritual, a vow is made to protect this specific yak from any harm.
So it lives out its life naturally.
Allowed to live out its natural life, not slaughtered or sold. The sources estimate maybe 20 yaks are released each year through this prayer release ritual, seen as reflecting a kind of divine control over animals, with humans as delegated supervisors of this sacred trust.
Amazing. Is there anything similar?
There's another related practice mentioned called zu. Also involves yaks being sacrificed to a deity, but again, crucially, without being killed.
How?
A deity is believed to enter the yak's body. This particular yak gets life freedom and, like a sithar animal, cannot be slaughtered or sold.
Powerful demonstrations of respect for life. Yet, they do eat yak meat.
The sources candidly acknowledge what might seem like a contradiction. There are times when beliefs and actions might appear to diverge, specifically when they do slaughter and consume yak meat.
How is that framed?
Not as hypocrisy, but possibly as following the requirement of their living. Acknowledging the pragmatic necessities of survival in a harsh environment where animal protein is essential.
A complex tension between ethics and subsistence.
It highlights that complex tension, yes, between deeply held religious ethics and the undeniable demands of survival.
So this deep cultural connection, this intricate traditional knowledge we see with the Dakpas, it exists right alongside those immense pressures of modernization and economic change we discussed.
Exactly. Which brings us squarely to the question of the future.
Yeah. These communities are clearly navigating an incredibly complex path, trying to balance preserving millennia-old traditions, their ecological knowledge, their cultural identity, with these powerful, often overwhelming forces of modernization, economic pressures, climate change.
Addressing the critical socioeconomic issues is paramount for the survival of these communities and their way of life. Finding ways to combat poverty that don't rely solely on just increasing herd size.
Mitigating those labor shortages.
Mitigating severe labor shortages impacting daily herding and processing. Stemming the tide of rural exodus by creating viable, attractive livelihoods within the pastoral areas.
And the environment.
Simultaneously, environmental stewardship is absolutely non-negotiable. A critical need to find sustainable solutions to manage grazing pressure, combat rural desertification.
integrating climate change impacts.
This work must integrate the reality of climate change impacts, understanding how warming temperatures, changing precipitation patterns are altering the rangeland, affecting animal health and migration.
And that yak wool potential.
Unlocking the potential of yak hair and wool remains a huge opportunity, significantly underexplored despite the fiber's remarkable properties.
And the herders are willing, if supported.
That clear willingness, like in Bhutan, to engage if supported with infrastructure and market access, that's a key takeaway. There's a pressing need for targeted capacity building.
Focusing on what?
Improving fiber collection, establishing or improving processing facilities, enhancing product quality control, and crucially, creating effective links between these producers and niche markets, willing to pay a premium for sustainable, high-quality, artisan-produced natural fibers.
So no single magic bullet solution.
No simple solutions here. As your sources wisely emphasize, it requires coordinated action on multiple levels.
From government policy.
Central policy, targeted support, research and technical innovation from universities, institutions, practical support from extension services working directly with herders.
And respecting local knowledge.
Fundamentally, supporting and integrating initiatives and adaptations happening at the nomad level itself, drawing on their existing knowledge.
Reducing isolation seems key too.
Reducing the isolation of these high-altitude pastoral ecosystems, strengthening links to external economies through fairer trade, better marketing, diversified income streams. That's highlighted as crucial.
And Norlha stands as one example of that integrated approach.
One compelling example, yes. Leveraging an underutilized resource, reviving skills, creating livelihoods, aiming for environmental benefits by adding value within the community and connecting them to a different market. It offers a potential pathway.
Though scaling remains the big question.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the future of this ancient way of life likely depends on finding innovative ways to leverage traditional knowledge and resources while navigating immense external pressures. It's a deeply dynamic situation.
Ancient ways confronting accelerating modern challenges.
The resilience, adaptability, deep connection to land and animals. It's undeniable. But the future trajectory hangs in a delicate balance.
Indeed. And perhaps, given the Dakpa's profound understanding of yak behavior, their intricate knowledge of their ecosystem, and the clear challenges of top-down approaches that sometimes fail to account for local realities, this leaves us with an important provocative thought for you to consider. How can the immense inherent wisdom embedded in the traditional ecological knowledge and cultural practices of communities like the Dakpas be genuinely and effectively integrated into current and future plans for rangeland management and pastoral development across the region?
A powerful and necessary question.
Ignoring or sidelining that millennia of accumulated wisdom would be a truly tremendous loss for everyone.
Absolutely. This has been quite a deep dive into the complex, fascinating world of Tibetan and Bhutanese yak pastoralism.
A world defined by towering altitudes, remarkable animals, resilient communities, and a future that hinges on navigating immense change while hopefully preserving the best of the past. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you feel significantly more informed about this unique and challenging part of the world.